So we have to get on the last A train out of Rockaways. And then because it's the last train for everyone. So it was like true party. So like everyone was like singing. There were speakers on the train.
Oh my God.
Everyone like still had their nutcrackers. So it was like the party keeps going. We're like on the train.
Hi everyone, welcome to They Had Fun. I'm Rachel and I am back with another amazing story about New York City. And up first are my 2 New York City recommendations for you this week, and then we will hear from my fabulous guests, so let's go ahead and get into it. And lucky for you guys, guess what? The first recommendation is not Summer Streets, and I'll tell you why. Because my best friend, she did the mission for everybody. She went to Summer Streets for the very first time, and she ate shit, and she still loved it. She was rollerblading. I'm not like trying to like make fun of her here. I mean it in the best sense of like, you know, sometimes you get on a bike, sometimes you go walking, things can happen. And she ate shit, and I was so worried that she was going to be so mad at me being like, I hate this. Why'd you tell me this? And she was like, oh no, it's the best. Like, I can't wait to do it next year. I still had so much fun. So mission accomplished on my Summer Streets propaganda. Okay. So my first recommendation we're going to get into is someplace I have been loving so much. It's Saint Jardim in the West Village. This place is basically just a perfect little wine bar dinner spot. I went here last week with friends who were in town who were visiting and specifically wanted to go to the West Village. I love the staff who works there. We had an excellent meal last week. You know, I'm on my champagne kick. We had a fabulous bottle of champagne. We had delicious food. All of my friends who ate the steak said that it was one of the highlights. I had some pasta that I thought was so delicious. Finished it off with some dessert. We had some vintage Amaro. We were drinking champagne. It was just such a lovely dinner. I've done other things there. They're open all day long if that's kind of more your speed to go work there and just have some like little breakfast items. To me, one of the best things about this place, besides the food and excellent wine, is of course the location. We are right at that dreamy little corner of West 10th Street. They have got the floor to ceiling windows that open up on nice days. It is so charming. When I was there, it was pouring down rain and there were still people sitting outside under the little awning. It was so romantic. It was so beautiful looking out into the street while the rain was coming down. I love Saint Jardim in the West Village. If you go, tell Basile I said hi. Go check it out. Okay, for my second recommendation, you guys know that in our stories on Instagram on Friday, I take requests of what New York City recommendations do you need? And the one I got this week, I'll just be honest with you guys. We're going to be honest on the podcast because you guys are the real heads. The content, I'm not going to be so straightforward. This person frequently asks me the same question, sometimes almost every week, and that is okay. I still answer them, and I answer them honestly and how I am feeling. So just being honest, I sometimes get this one, but it was the request for what's new in Ridgewood. Okay. And we know that I'm a resident of Ridgewood. I am very in tune with this neighborhood, the bars, the restaurants, the whole scene. But one of my favorite things recently is this little shop. It's called Graceland. It's on Woodbine. They happen to do vintage clothes. They also do tailoring. I got a pair of pants done recently. That was like seriously 2 thumbs up on the tailoring job. But they also do these little vintage pop-up markets that they're doing, I think the last Sunday of each month. Check their Instagram. They said one was August 30th, but that's a Friday. So I don't know, maybe that's a rare one. Check out their Instagram. It's Graceland. But these markets are so fun. I went to one a few weeks ago. I got this super cool pink leather kind of like vintage moto jacket. There's people outside that have ceramics. There's some people doing food. There's jewelry. There's vintage clothes. They do it all. I've been loving Graceland. They have this purse I've had my eye on that I want to go back and buy, but I've been stopping myself. So, you know, I always say the same thing. Every time I talk to people and tell them I live in Ridgewood, they are always like, I want to come to Ridgewood. What should I do? I want to go to Rolo's. It's always fucking Rolo's, which I did have a great dinner at last week as well. Rolo's is wonderful, but there are other things to do. So if you're looking for an excuse to come shopping and walk around and then go get a drink somewhere, go check out Graceland. Okay. Those are my 2 recommendations for you. It is still summer. Oh my God, my birthday's next week. So I guess this may be my birthday episode. I'm going to be out and about in the city this weekend doing some very fun stuff. Don't worry, you'll be seeing a lot of it on our Instagram. It's just the truth of my life these days. So let's go ahead and get into my guest for this week. Truly, I'm a fan. It is the honest to God truth. I am a fan of hers. I asked her to be on the show. She said yes. In regards to New York, very important. She is a beverage director right here in the city, but also very important. She is the co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, which is all about the restaurant industry in New York City. We're going to talk a lot about it. It's called FOH Front of House. Please welcome to the show, Kelly Sullivan.
Hi.
Hello. I feel like I've already said this to you, but I feel like I'm having a little bit of a fangirl moment here where I always stalk all of my guests to convince them to be on the show. But you in particular, I know your voice. I know a little bit about you. I have loved your podcast. And then I was like, I think 7 seasons in, I can now ask Kelly if she wants to be on the show. So why don't we talk a little bit about FOH, Front of House? It is truly one of my favorite podcasts, and it fits in to the perfect genre that I love, that I tell people the podcast that I listen to, and it's 2 women talking to each other. That's my favorite.
It is very much that. Yes. Thank you so much. It's such a funny, the podcast is such a funny little project for me because, so it's a podcast that I have with my friend Lillian, and we started it, we were coworkers, and we were basically feeling like, okay, like service industry people are always talking about the industry, and it's sometimes not, the conversations within the industry felt very different to what we were seeing. They felt very different to the conversations we were having amongst ourselves. And so we were like, well, what if we just like started recording some of those conversations, started this podcast? But basically Lillian at the time was doing, my co-host was doing stand up and doing a lot of comedy stuff. So she was very like, she was like, we're starting a podcast. This is the thing. And I, on the other hand, was not doing any of that stuff. So I was kind of like, oh, this cool girl that I work with wants to start a podcast. I was like, if that ever happened, you know what I mean? Like, I was just kind of like, oh, cool. Well, that means like we can get drinks sometime. You know what I mean? I thought I was going to say in the planning stages, but I was happy with that. I was like, it's a great excuse to hang out with this girl I already think is cool.
Yes, totally.
And then now we've been doing it for like, I don't know, 6 years, 7, a long time.
Oh my God.
I don't know, but we started it before the pandemic, and it felt like it was like chugging along before the pandemic. And now it's been 4 years since, you know what I mean? So I'm like, it's been a long time.
It's been a very long time. I mean, I found it during the pandemic because, it's part of the reason I started this podcast. I was just so desperate for any content related to New York City.
Yeah.
And I would seriously just like go into podcasts on like my phone and just type in New York City, and just hope something would come up. And actually, weirdly, there isn't that many podcasts about New York. There really isn't that many of them. But somehow you guys came up, probably just talking about the restaurant industry. And then I was like, all through COVID, I was just hooked. And I think it gives a really good insight. I don't work in the restaurant industry. I did when I first moved to New York, but like I wasn't in it terribly long. It gives an interesting insight to the industry in New York City. But also my favorite part of the show is the service stories.
Yeah.
All the time I'm like, am I being that person like on the tail end? But like we all know what that's like in New York, going to these restaurants and you see things and you're like, is this real? Like, is this actually happening? And just like hear you guys talk about them. They're so good.
Thank you.
Do you think you guys will just keep going along as long as you guys want to do it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know if you have this sense, but it's almost like it's so much a part of my routine. And now Lillian lives in Oregon. So we are doing like Zoom calls to stay in touch. So often we're recording after we've already been talking for an hour or 2. It almost is not even real to me. Like the podcast, sometimes like people will bring it up to me and I'll be like, you heard that? Like but my conversation, you heard it? Like, so I think we'll just keep doing it. Yeah, I guess till one of us is like, I can't anymore. Like,
it's so funny. I mean, I love the show. It's like of note. I feel the same where like people will be like, oh, I heard that on the show. And I'm like, oh, you're listening. Like someone is listening to
show?
this. I would have never supposed. Like, okay, great. But I love FOH. And I think if you enjoy the restaurant industry in New York, or just hearing stories or people who are a part of that, everyone should tune in and listen to FOH. And that's our little plug on your podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the regular questions of the show.
Yes.
Get to learn more about you and your time in New York. So first up, when did you move to New York?
So I moved to New York in 2014, basically right after I graduated college. I'm from Chicago and I went to college in Indiana. I graduated college and I moved home for maybe 2 months. And then I was like, all right, I'm moving to New York.
It's similar a little bit to mine. I also graduated, went home for 2 months to make some money, and then did the exact same thing. And as I've said before on the show, like my parents did not, they're just like, okay, good luck.
Yeah.
Have a good time.
Yeah. Oh, I moved on a Greyhound bus.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom was like, actively, that's a bad idea. And I was like, okay. And she was like, okay. And then she like dropped me off at the bus and was like, toodles.
I love that. I love when people have like the story in the background a little bit of you arrived on a bus. Because I've talked to people who've done like cross country road trips. Oh, we had another one that was on a bus. Maybe it was the train, whatever it was. She was like, it was a choice for me to be like, I need this much time to get myself in that brain wavelength. I don't know. Maybe for you, maybe it was just like the ticket was cheap.
Yeah, I mean, what was the logic of that? I think there was part of me that because my mom was like, this is not a good choice, that I almost wanted to make it as like, I wanted to kind of lean into that. And like, my mom was like, this is not a good choice in a very casual way, like not, and then you're written out of the will. Like it was like where she was just like, that kind of makes no sense to me because like everyone in my family, we're very centrally located.
Yeah.
It's not common, like the cousin stuff of like kind of striking out. And so it was a very casual, I don't think that's a good choice, but I was like, I'm 22. I was like, getting my bindle on my shoulder.
Like, I'm out of here.
My mom, and so I think it was like more motivated by that.
When you showed up and you get off the bus, you got your bags, like, do you know people? Do you have an apartment to go to? Do you have a job?
Oh, that was the major motivation, was that all my friends were moving here, and for a lot of them for reasons like jobs, or they were from here, or like whatever. And so that was like the major reason to me to be like, in New York was with my friends.
I would just like to note quickly, you can't see this because we don't do video, but when you said jobs, you did jobs in quotes. You were like, and my friend moved here for jobs. In quotes.
I mean, also like it's post-college, like some of them were interns. You know what I mean? Like I went to like a tiny liberal arts college in Indiana. The jobs that they got were not, nobody was going to like the big four, I mean?
I mean, you're leading us in perfectly kind of here to this, like the next question is always, why did you move to New York? And you're talking about like the friends. Do you want to extrapolate that a bit more? Was there anything else, or was it literally just like, I can party with my buds?
When I say that, it's like, that is pretty much the extent of it. Like,
and that's a great answer. That's no problem with that. I love that.
I mean, like, also, I don't know how to drive. I didn't want to learn. So I was like, that's convenient. That's awesome. And I think also like something I reflect on now, having lived here for 10 years and being in my 30s now, I just had no context for like, people are like, New York is so hard. New York is so tough. But I had no other context for adult life. And so even like I had rented an apartment in Indiana and the rent was like $300 a month because that's what it costs in Indiana. I had no context of like rent should be cheaper, or like now I think about moving to New York and I'm like, it would be so, if I lived somewhere else, I would be intimidated, but it didn't even occur to me.
Yeah, like you didn't have anything to compare it to. You're like, okay, well, this is what everyone does. Like, everyone buys a collapsible cart and gets their groceries and like walks a mile back home with them. Yeah, no.
I was like, okay. Like, I was like, yeah, I'm renting like a room for 2 years I lived when I first moved to New York in the room on the railroad where you have to like let yourself into the apartment every time, like to go to the bathroom, to use the kitchen. Like,
oh yes. Yeah.
I paid $600 for that privilege. And I didn't know that was crazy. It didn't really occur to me that there was a different way to live, because I was like, $600 isn't bad for rent.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
I think about that all the time with my first apartment. It was like such a literal shithole. And I remember like my parents came to visit. They were, horrified. Like they were like, what is happening? My mom still talks about it. I was like, oh, watch out for that. That's the pee corner. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, that's where people pee in the middle of the night. Like, and it was like, same thing, didn't register. Like at the time, I mean, like now, obviously mortified, but like, then I was just like, that's how it is. Like, this is what this building is like. Like, what are you going to do?
I know. It's so funny to me now, but it was great.
Yeah, no, of course it was great.
Like, I loved it. And I immediately loved it.
Yeah. I love that the answer was, I mean, really, I have to do this. Like, it was for fun. It was to be with friends. It was to have a good, and sometimes we talk to people on the show that are like, it was the dream since I was 5, be on Broadway or like so. And I love someone being like, I had all these friends, like it was going to be fun. Like, I love that. I think it's great. And considering that basically you moved here for the fun, now I can ask you the most important question of the show. And that is, of course, Kelly, what is the most fun you've ever had in New York City?
Okay. So this is my answer because I live with my best friend still.
Awesome.
And you asked me to be on this podcast. And I was like, okay, so this is kind of the concept. Because I knew she was obviously going to have been part of the day. And so I said, start thinking about some days. And then we both said this one day. And I was like, that's the day then.
I love it. I love it.
Which was actually during COVID randomly.
Whoa.
During the summer of 2020. Okay. So to preface this, what you said when you asked me on the podcast is I had just done an episode where I was talking about something I love about New York is kind of like the process of things here.
Yes.
And I was specifically talking about Shakespeare in the Park, which is something I love. Part of what I love about it is like the nutty process of acquiring a ticket.
Yes.
And I love just a day, like where it's like, okay, if I know I have to be at the ticket drop at noon, we're starting the clock. And then I'm going to be out, and then the performance starts at 8. So then I love a wander around. I love a walk around. I love
yes,
locations. That's my shit. And because I don't drive, I love travel. I love like trains, bus, and I very rarely take cars as well. I just don't really like cars in general. So I loved hearing you be like, you bike to LaGuardia. I was like, I'm obsessed. Immediately, I was like, genius. Love it. Perfection.
Yeah, you found the right friend in that one. I can't tell you how much I'm sorry to all the listeners, but like, I cannot tell you how much the theme of hating cars has come up in the last like 15 interviews I've done. Every single person across the board is like, I fucking hate cars.
Because it's like, it barely saves time in New York.
It's terrible.
So I love like good rambly day, multiple locations. We're hopping on this train. We're hopping on this bus. We're grabbing a couple city, but yeah, I love it. So this was, and summer 2020, I'm not one of those who's like nostalgic for COVID of like, we all had time to do our 5-hour arts. Like, no, but obviously I work in the restaurant industry. Like I like being out. I like life. But this was just such a fun day. And it was so specific to COVID. And there's just something like it cannot be recreated in any way because it had to do with COVID. So my best friend and I went to the beach day. I love the beach. Living it up. We're outside Rippers, we're getting burgers and stuff.
So at Rockaway.
We're at Rockaway. Our friend Jillian comes to meet us at like right around sunset. We walk over to Rockaway Taco, get a couple margs, and then we're like, we kind of like want to tie one on. We were all three living in Brooklyn at the time. And we're like, but we kind of want to tie one on, and we don't want to like go back to Brooklyn yet. Like we want to stay out in the Rockaways. And so we're like, let's take the train down to the wharf, which is on the other side of the Rockaways, like down by like 107, the end of the train line. This is why it's COVID specific. This is when they had stopped running the subways all night. And so there was a last train. And so we stayed at the wharf, just truly getting loaded. And then like walked over to the sea and we're like, the magnificent sea. You know what I mean? Like we're all girls who love the ocean. So it was like also that, like, we're like, look at her beautiful waves. And then it's literally like, it's the last train. And if we are not on the last train, and also it's literally summer 2020, like talking about not liking cars, I don't think because it was like, you weren't supposed to be close to anyone. Like, I don't think I had taken like an Uber, a Lyft, anything in months. So it was like, I don't even know if it like was in our minds at this point. So we have to get on the last A train out of Rockaways. And then because it's the last train for everyone. So it was like true party. So like everyone was like singing. There were speakers on the train.
Oh my God.
Everyone like still had their nutcrackers. So it was like the party keeps going. We're like on the train. And then of course, by the time I get back to Brooklyn, I've been out in the sun drinking for like 15 hours at this point. I've worshipped the ocean.
Yes.
Depleted. I'm exhausted. So it was like the end of the night, but it was like just such a rambly day. And so the high, especially at that time of like just socializing, and how I think like what's so special about it to me is like that will never happen again because the A runs all night now. So I'll never have the experience of being like running to the last train, which is amazing. The subway should run all night. It should run more frequently. I wish it was easier to get to the Rockaways. I wish you didn't have to wait sometimes 20 minutes to get on an A train. But for a one-time only deal, running to the last train is so fun.
I love that. It's the perfect just like bounce around New York. What are you going to do? Hanging out on the beach all day. Like I've had those days. They're amazing. And then you're like sunburned and you're coming back on like, but the specific part of it all, which is what you're already saying, is that element of what we all knew if you stayed in New York during COVID was there was this collective thing specifically for this, getting on that train. And it's like, we're all in here. We've all been cooped up. We're all so happy together now. And I can just see that party car and how fucking great that would have been for those 45 minutes that you like rode it back into Brooklyn.
Yeah. Such a specific like cabin fever.
Yes.
Again, would not ever want to experience it again in my life. But like some of those moments just remain so funny and silly. And I think that is something I love about New York too, is like, we're all cooped up, we're going great. It's like the silliness that sometimes like breaks, because it's like, yeah, we're all on the train. So like, yeah, like we're all just going to start dancing. Like that's just going to like, we just are, where everyone's like kind of losing it right now. Just such a funny time, funny day.
It's perfect.
Yeah, it was.
I love it. And it's those moments that like we get those all of the time. And I feel like bad for people who don't live here that they do not know that very specific feeling of how that feels. I mean, sorry, it's cheesy, but like lucky that like we have that. And
that is so, like, when I think about my life in New York and I think about my friends that I chose to be close to. And I think New York, it allows you to build a life that is centered around friends in a way that I think is pretty rare. And I'm friends with, we call ourselves professional single women. I've been single most of my adult life, and I love being single. And
hell yes,
most of my friends are single women. And it's like being allowed to build a life that the undergirding structure is friendship rather than partnership or work or like these other things, which are all valid and great and amazing, but it's really special. I've found so many people and I feel so lucky and I feel so abundant, and like, it is truly luck. It's lucky.
It's so funny because I like, obviously I'm married, but I feel the exact same way, where it's like compared to other places, like so much of my life is focused around my friends. The same thing. Like, and I'll even call some of my friends who have like moved away, and I'm like, ugh, I don't have anyone to hang out with. I've texted like 17 people and no one can meet up. And my friend is like, I text 2 people. Like I don't have, it's like we totally take for granted even like the fact that I have a roster of 20 I can just like go through.
No, I mean, I think it's something that one of the biggest culture shocks for Lillian when she moved, my co-host, when she moved to Oregon, is she was like, I don't have, like, you have friends, of course. And she moved for grad school. You have your people in your program, you have friends. Like, it's not like alone, but it's just not the same. It's different. And I love that.
And isn't that beautiful? No, it is. It's like, I'm just hearing this and I have to do my like tie this up and sound so like I always do, but it's like, we cannot take for granted the friendships and the fun. But it's just true. Yeah. Like it's so great. Okay. So I think maybe that will almost play into that, but I have to ask you the last question, which is, what is your favorite thing about New York?
I mean, definitely, I think the opportunity, I mean, obviously I'm a bartender, I'm a yapper. I love to talk. I love meeting people. I mean, part of why I like being single is like, I like going on dates. I'm dating to date, like the opposite of dating to marry. Cause I'm just like, everyone's like weird and interesting and I just want to talk to them. So I'm like, even if it's just for 2 hours, I'm like, tell me about your weird life.
Yeah.
The opportunity to meet so many people. And then, because I don't want to be like overly sentimental about New Yorkers, but it's like, I have stars in my eyes a little bit, but everyone's so down. And so it's like, you meet so many people. And then if you say like, let's get a drink, even someone you met at a bar that night, they're like, yeah, let's get a drink.
Yes.
The opportunity to just be around people and know that they're going to be cool and fun and interesting. It's awesome.
This is like the best answer. This is my type of answer. Like, because sometimes we get like the people, but you're saying it differently. Like sometimes it's like the people are kind, the people are creative, but it's like really you're like the opportunity to talk to all of these people, the opportunity to hang out and have fun and do cool shit. It's a great answer. I agree. That's what I love about New Yorkers. I just did it last weekend. I met some random person and like forced them to go get a drink with me afterwards. Yeah. It's the best.
Conversation happens so much more organically because you're like, everyone's day was crazy. So it's like you're meeting someone and you're immediately having a real conversation with them. And I don't mean like real in like a corny way of like the bigger topics. Like, it's like you're talking to someone like you would talk to a friend because you got to get it out there. And I really enjoy it.
I love that. That's so happy to have you on the show because we're just doing that very thing. It's just 2 New Yorkers sitting around telling our stories to each other.
I know.
And I loved hearing all of them and hearing and learning more about you after being a fan of yours for so long. So thank you for saying yes and for being on the show and sharing all those stories with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
For the listeners' knowledge, I'm, as an example of this, immediately we logged onto the Zoom call into Rachel. I was like, oh, my phone troubles, my package up for 20 minutes. I was like, you wouldn't believe what's going on with UPS. And it's like, and we don't know each other, but it's just.
But you can count on me texting you like in 3 days and being like, so you want to get a drink? And that's just what New Yorkers do. Thank you again so much. But of course, most of all, Thanks, New York. They had fun. Okay, I hate cars. Sorry. Okay, keep going.
No, I agree.